All right, music students, let's jump right in. As a music journalist, I'm absolutely thrilled to share this explainer with you today. We're going to dive deep into the incredibly chaotic 1960s British music industry. Our goal? We're going to deconstruct a very famous, very widely accepted myth about the Beatles' very first chart-topping hit.
You know the story, right? November 26, 1962. After signing off on the 18th and final take of a brand new track called Please Please Me, legendary producer George Martin hits the studio talkback button. He proudly proclaims to his new young protégés that they've just secured their first smash hit. It's a literally legendary moment in music history.
Now, history remembers this as an absolute, undeniable triumph. But as journalists, if we look a little closer at the fragmented, totally contradictory data from the 1963 record charts, we really have to ask ourselves, is this massive milestone historically accurate? I mean, did Please Please Me actually hit number one?
So here's our roadmap to solve this mystery. First, the number one controversy. Second, we'll compare 1963 chart methodologies. Third, rejecting the safe pop hit. Fourth, forging a trademark sound. And finally, the legacy of their creative defiance. Let's get to it.
Okay, part one, the number one controversy. Picture this. The official single drops in the UK on January 11th, 1963. This was during one of the most bitter winters in British history, so Snowden teenagers were literally glued to their radios. So how did the record actually do? Well, according to the multi-million-selling compilation album simply titled One, the track only reached number 2. It was completely blocked from the top spot by this rather dull track called The Wayward Wind by Frank Efield. Crazy, right? Because it stalled at number 2 on one specific list, the record retailer chart. It was actually left off the band's definitive greatest hits collection decades later. This omission raises a huge, absolutely critical question for anyone studying music history. Which chart actually mattered back then?
Which brings us to part two, 1963 chart methodologies compared.
You have to understand, before a unified, computerized system existed, the industry was a complete Wild West. Just look at the sheer inconsistency of this data. Different publications used completely different methods to track sales. The widely followed NME used phone surveys of record shops and ranked Please Please Me squarely at number 1. Melody Maker used postal returns and, again, placed it at number 1. But the record retailer chart, they only surveyed a tiny, incredibly small panel of about 30 shops, and they placed it at number 2.
As the complete book of the British charts points out, until February 1969, there simply was no universally accepted official chart. None. But here is the real kicker. The record retailer chart, the one with that tiny 30-shop survey panel, eventually became the canonical source used by the modern official charts company. This retroactively stripped the track of its number one status, even though NME had the biggest circulation and was way more trusted by actual fans at the time.
Let's move on to part 3, rejecting the safe pop hit.
To truly get the context of this chart debate, we need to rewind a few months to a major creative clash. It really highlights the intense label control over early chart success. George Martin desperately wanted the band to record a track called How Do You Do It? This was a standard, Tin Pan Alley-style composition written by a pro named Mitch Murray. Martin knew this formula worked. He knew it was a guaranteed smash hit, and as the label boss, he heavily insisted they use it.
But the band? No way. Their massive egos and intense artistic pride made them fiercely reject the track. They were desperate to establish John and Paul as premier songwriters. Plus, they had this deep disdain for what they considered light white English pop. They felt that dropping a safe, pre-written track would completely betray the hard-edged rock and roll reputation they had just bled for in the clubs of Hamburg.
Paul McCartney was actually pretty brutal about it. He flat out said they hated it. They were terrified of going back home to the Cavern Club in Liverpool, holding this safe, commercial, cabaret-style record. It just didn't sound anything like their true artistic identity. They firmly believed they could do better themselves.
So let's look at part 4, forging a trademark sound.
Having completely pushed back against the label, Martin gave them a very clear ultimatum. Fine, but you have to deliver something of your own that is much, much better. And their evolution in the studio was incredibly fast. See, John initially wrote Please Please Me as this slow, dreary, bluesy dirge, kind of like Roy Orbison. Martin heard it in September, told them to speed up the tempo, and they absolutely nailed it.
They completely reworked the arrangement and came back in November to lay down that triumphant, upbeat recording in just 18 takes.
When you put the two tracks side by side, the sonic contrast is just staggering. They traded the twee, safe, cabaret feel of that rejected track for something so vibrant and energetic. Please Please Me had John's distinctive bluesy harmonica intro, plus those brilliant vocal cascades inspired by the Everly Brothers. It was literally their trademark sound being born right there in the studio. But here is a wild twist from an industry perspective. George Martin was actually 100% right about the commercial viability of that rejected pop song. He ended up giving How Do You Do It to another local group, Jerry and the Pacemakers, and they took it straight to #1. Easy. But of course, the massive risk the Beatles took also paid off, giving them their own entirely distinct hit, regardless of which chart you personally choose to believe.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Legacy of Creative Defiance.
By stubbornly refusing to take the easy path to the top of the charts, the band achieved something far more culturally significant. Their creative defiance led straight to them recording their debut album in that legendary marathon 12-hour session. By insisting on their own material, they cemented themselves as elite songwriters. But more importantly, they completely shattered the industry norm that relied entirely on professional external writers from places like Tin Pan Alley or Denmark Street. They proved unequivocally that a band could generate its own hits.
So, what is the ultimate takeaway here? It's that their artistic rebellion didn't just earn them their own hotly debated first #1. It permanently changed the DNA of pop music. From that moment on, the entire standard shifted. Suddenly, pop groups were increasingly expected to write their own material and actually play their own instruments. A real game changer.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought as we wrap up this explainer. If they had just surrendered to the label's control, if they had just recorded that safe pop track to get an easy #1, would the era of the self-contained rock band have ever truly begun? Would the modern music landscape as we know it even exist today? It's definitely something to chew on the next time you're looking at the charts. Thanks for joining me.